And you've made films in the past, feature films, big blockbuster films. Was that in any way useful when you came to make a long-form documentary about this relationship?
With Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine?
Yeah.
I think it was only useful in maybe working with some, great actors, movie stars, Johnny Depp, Denzel Washington, Gary Oldman, who's obsessively into details, like actors are very obsessive. So, and I've worked with a lot of athletes and music artists as well because of the music videos and ads, but the motion picture business is those egos. So when you're dealing with all the rock stars and the Defiant Ones, who all were wonderful, don't get me wrong, but you understand the nature of those egos, those performers, those that are ultra famous,
I mean, and you talk about working with big stars.
Let me get my pimp.
Please get as
right.
comfy as you like.
Okay.
You talk about working with big stars, right? The roster of names in this is incredible. I mean, Jimmy Iovine and Dr. Dre alone to start with, right? But then, of course, you then have Bono, Ice Cube, Gwen Stefani, Stevie Nicks.
My favorite.
I mean, she's great.
Bruce Springsteen.
I mean,
Snoop Dogg.
Bono,
yeah.
I mean, when you were assembling the cast list to tell this story, how did you start? Where do you even start?
They say follow the money. I follow the story. So when we started, you might have had like 5 of them. It ended up being 15, 18, 20, genuine rock iconic legends, you know. So maybe we had 5 or 8 on the piece of paper when we were doing the treatment initially. And then you start following the stories, and then you have to go get this one and that one, and Trenton Reznor from Nine Inch Nails, and whoever else, So it was, or if I had known it was going to be all the people it ended up being, I would have been probably frightened and not done it.
Well, I was going to ask.
Yeah.
I mean, surely you say you start off with 5 people, you think 5 people alone, who are all A-list stars, who are all absolute legends, you think that's great. But then you get to that. Did it reach a point where you're thinking, this is unmanageable? Because so many people want to be part of this and want to talk and want to tell their story in relation to the greater story. Did you get to the point where you felt a little daunted?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it became overwhelming. It was meant to take a year, this whole production. And ultimately, it ended up taking 3.5 physical years. And after the year mark, we realized, like, oh, wow, this is going to take some doing. And but all those artists actually had a lot of love for Jimmy and Dre, and it was very easy in that respect. There was no prima donnas. Everyone who sat down, usually when you sit down with these rock stars or anyone famous, they give you 15 minutes. These interviews were averaging over 2.5, 3 hours. And I'm using 15 minutes of that, but they really committed, they stepped up to it. Even nemesis, business rivals, former wives, people that, weren't in good standing with the guys stepped up. Because they knew what I was trying to do. And, I did something that was unique as well. After we cut a few scenes that were really working and very dynamic, I would show people before I interviewed them. So they can see the nature of what it was I was trying to do, and I saw that really opened them up,
Well, I was going to ask, I mean, in relation to showing people back what has been filmed, sort of getting either their approval or their understanding of the nature of the project. So showing other people what had been filmed, that was instrumental in kind of bringing them aboard and making them comfortable with talking about things that might have been quite tricky.
Yeah, that, number one. They were already on board on the day of the shoot. I'm showing it to them just to show them how wickedly honest it is, because there was a nature to the whole thing that was a little cheeky, as you would say here, right? And frank, and there was a sense of humor to it, and I wanted them to understand how far what the latitude was, and they did. Everyone stepped up. I was shocked. Not one person disappointed.
I mean, did anyone take you by surprise though during filming itself? I mean, were there people who you would expect to be a certain way, or to say certain things, or to have an opinion, who once they started talking, suddenly...
I think they all surprised me, because what surprised me, and I didn't realize, is you're sitting down with writers and poets. I'm like, oh, okay. Why are all these people, whether it's Springsteen, whether it's Snoop, whether it's Patti Smith, it was just beautiful what they were saying, how they were saying, the insights they had. And then I realized, these are some of the greatest writers of our time. They're poets. So I was surprised by that. I was surprised at the narrative mindset they had, you know.
And just to wheel back to something you mentioned about the project taking 3.5 years. At the start, when you first started it out, what was the story?
See, I got to sit up on you now. You know
Sorry, yeah, please do.
I'm going from pimping to
serious Frost Nixon kind of thing. Like, what was the kind of the nub of the story you wanted to tell? Because at the very beginning, we see Jimmy and Dre are about to ink this deal with Apple, $3 billion deal. Given their backgrounds, astonishing. What was the heart of that story originally? What was it that drove you to make this?
That's an interesting question, because on paper I knew that this was an interesting dynamic, these two partners. You never see black guy from this racially charged neighborhood, Compton, white guy from Red Hook, Brooklyn, racially charged neighborhood, Italian. That partnership over 20 years, culminating in beats and that sell of, you know, whatever, all that great music, and they're still so tight and connected. I've never heard of a partner, so I wanted to explore that partnership. And someone once said to me, who saw the film, they said, you know, this is 3 films. You have a Dr. Dre story, a Jimmy story, then you have when they meet and what they create together. That's a different film. And there's this modern day narrative floating through the whole thing. That, and the way we open the film with the Apple deal almost goes away.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing, because you couldn't have put that on paper, because you're clocking something. Most documentaries about historical, and then other documentaries are like living in the now, modern day, and you're following someone like Citizen4 with, who's the guy, Snowden, right? Yep. You're right there with him. This was a combination of both. So that was not on paper. There was a discovery process which kept you on your toes, which is why one thought it was only going to be a year and it ended up being 3.5 years.
I mean, what was it like when it passes the year deadline? You think it's going to take a year? You're not telling me for 2.5 years you had to ring up the company every day and go, nope, still not ready. Maybe tomorrow. I mean, what do you end up doing?
At that point, you know, we kept ringing him up, and then I met with the CEO of the company that financed it. He says, Allen, I showed him some scenes, and he was really impressed. And he said, what do you need from us? I said, I need time and resources, because I realized the more time we were taking, the better the archival footage was. The archival footage was amazing. That stuff with Eazy-E and NWA recording straight out of Compton, no one ever knew existed, not even Dr. Dre. And that came with time, you know. And you see in this film too that we use the archival as scenes. We edit them as, we drop the audience off into a scene with the artist now. We don't just cut to, you know. So there's all these different styles and techniques, and there's this lyricism that I've figured out, this language, a new lexicon for narrative storytelling in this medium. That took time. Took time to find that, you know.
And with the archive footage, the insanely rare archive footage, I mean, people are going to be stunned. Even people filmed those kind of events, Eazy-E recording in the studio, some of the recording studio stuff with Stevie Nicks.
Oh, that's amazing
and Jimmy.
stuff, yeah.
So how do you happen upon that?
Well, you know, these artists, I'll use Stevie as an example. She filmed the whole documentary that she never put together on the making of Belladonna, her first solo album that Jimmy Iovine produced. So all those recording sessions, she never had it edited.
Right.
And she says, you know, I have this box of, and a lot of the artists were like that. Bono, U2, they had a lot of stuff. Now there was Rattle and Hum that Jimmy was a part of producing that album, and they made a film, and we went and pulled, it was like Where's Waldo? We had to go find Jimmy, because when you watch the Rattle and Hum film, you don't see a lot of Jimmy in there. So we pulled out the 16mm and found Jimmy, and then created these scenes. Same thing with Bruce Springsteen. A lot of that black and white footage of those sessions for Born to Run was actually Darkness on the Edge of Town. Right. Those sessions, there's a documentary with Bruce Springsteen about the making of Darkness on the Edge of Town. And you have to go again and go find Where's Waldo with Jimmy and go through their archives, you know. That was fun.
But how did the guys react when they saw some of this footage that they might never even have seen? I mean, were they taken aback? Were they speechless?
Jimmy, who's not nostalgic at all, never looks back, started taking stock of his life and realizing he came up with something. To see Jimmy touched by this was amazing, because Jimmy is just, you know, and he's like, I realized, and he actually says it in the movie, and this is the benefit of showing them some footage while you're making it. He said, my college was John Lennon, Bruce Springsteen, and Patti Smith. Those were my college years. I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about culture. I didn't know anything about music, and they taught me everything. And he knew that through watching the cuts that I was showing him. That's when it dawned on him that that was his college years. Because he started with John Lennon in the record plant when he was 19.
And again, it's this, like you say, about this friendship and this partnership, which has endured for quite some time, during some very testing and turbulent
Oh my God,
times.
yeah.
I mean, what did you kind of learn about these people that you didn't already know?
These two?
Yeah.
Jimmy and Dre in particular, the thing that I think sets them apart from anyone I've ever met, and I would like to adopt this, is they don't get caught up in BS. They don't get caught up in people's emotions and gossip. They just exist purely for what they're creating. You can try to talk football with them and their eyes will just glaze over because they're not interested in it. They're interested in what they're doing, you know. Some people would say that's extreme, and I don't think I can be that extreme, but the whole thing of not getting caught up in gossip and BS and getting caught up in people's emotions here, there, whatever, and focusing like that, that rubbed off now. Like for me, I'm like, oh, that's how you achieve like light year success, you know, quick. Cut all the BS out.
And right at the start of the film, I mean, because they do actually mention that quite early on about Dre having a great BS detector. Like, what do you think the film then also says about America? Because I think at the start that is raised as a topic about the myth of the American dream. What did you kind of take from filming? As filming develops and you assembled this story, what do you then make of the American dream, the one that's sold and the one that's explored in this film, in this series of films?
John Landau had that great quote, Bruce Springsteen's producer and manager, you know, we know the American myth. American dream, it's a myth. But with Jimmy, he starts going on about Jimmy becoming a better person. You know, the American dream, you know, I learned a lot about it. It's what you make it, and it's possible. These guys that came from nowhere, they had no connections, they had no resources, they had no education. It's similar to me. You know, I found with Defiant Ones, I was telling my story, and my mother was remarkable. And like, you can be anything you want to be. Don't have to conform to what your teachers or whatever. So, you know, it's a real thing. But what Jimmy and Dre really taught me is that fame, fortune, success is not the dream. I think in part 4, Jimmy talks about it. You see Dre struggling with it. If you don't reconcile your demons or put a saddle on those demons, those voices in your head, whatever it may be, that darkness you have, there is no dream. Doesn't matter how much money you have. I've met so many billionaires that are miserable. That's not a dream. Yeah.
But there's that great line that kind of took me aback when Jimmy Iovine's talking about working on, it was multiple albums, maybe it was with U2, but there's that great line, he says, I was focused and miserable.
Yes.
And you just think, you are at the top of your game. And he was working 24 hours a day, he was saying 7 days a week. And like that, I think that was part of the aim, to show the sheer amount of blood that has to be sweated in order to become these people.
Yeah, I mean, see, it's remarkable about what you're saying is that the movie, I hate this word, there was a meta quality to editing and making it. It was all the lessons were rubbing off in the editing room, and I was pushing those editors beyond. I mean, it was like a recording session for Born to Run. And yes, at the end of the day, that was the dilemma Jimmy had and Dre had, that you're working so hard, you're miserable, and you're achieving great things, but again, you got to reconcile those demons. It doesn't matter, all that. In the 90s too, when, you know, they're making hits after hit after hit after hit, and then things get violent.
Yeah.
And dangerous with Death Row and Tupac and all that stuff, and then there's those corporate wars with Time Warner, you know. I mean, Jimmy was in the trenches, and then you come out the other end and you go, what was all this about? You know, you have to reflect back. This is the first time Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine, because Dre has that thing too, he doesn't look back, had to reflect back and look at what got them here.
Well, also as well, there's an incident he talked about with Dee Barnes, which you probe because you can't escape it because it's part of the story. I mean, he is very somber and reflective about that. I mean, what was the sensation during that sort of sequence when you were filming that? And
it came in steps, because the first thing we filmed is he apologized. You know, going into the film, we agreed to that, but then there was this whole cathartic thing. You know, he's probably the most he's talking in the whole movie. He's just going on and expressing his feelings. It was the first time I think he dealt with that himself. So what we're getting in the Defiant Ones, when you're talking about the situation with Dee Barnes and Dre, is you're hearing Dre talk about something he's probably never talked about with his family.
Really?
For the first time on camera. He just doesn't, him and Jimmy, they don't get down like that. They keep moving. They keep moving. So this is the first time I think Dre processed it. And we're there with him processing it. So to me, it was more critical than just an apology. It's an atonement, a complete atonement. And moreover, and more importantly, to get her to be a part of it and speak her truth and have her voice. That was something I didn't want to not do, you know.
And just almost finally, I was just going to ask about the kind of what it says about contemporary American culture and its influence worldwide, of course, because it's inescapable. Particularly, you know, they've all worked on these albums, they've all worked on these pieces of art which have shaped modern music across multiple genres. It's kind of breathtaking. Were you kind of always sort of every now and again having to pinch yourself, thinking, these guys have dominated their genres and you know, influenced so many others? I mean, it's kind of impossible, isn't it? How much?
It is. I mean, someone asked me, you know, how do you make a film about the history of music? Where did we start? I said, well, you can't. You have to almost micro it. You have to, you know, Toby, I'm going to do his story, and then you find out along the way it was, you know, there's a cobweb, and I was naive. I had no idea that this narrative. Even now, when you're saying it, I'm like, wow, yeah. You know, when you're a part of something, you don't realize that's what it is.
Yeah.
But Jimmy's story, coupled with Dre's story, you get the history of rock music, and you get the history of hip hop music. And I had no idea. I mean, I knew Dre was around since this. We kind of knew about Jimmy. I had a record deal with Interscope Records in the mid-'90s for 4 years. And none of us knew about Jimmy's rock producing past. There was no Google.
Right.
And we're all young, dumb, and in our 20s with all the rock stars there and the executives, and I had a record deal. Jimmy didn't talk about it, so we didn't know about any of this stuff. Never, until I started making this film.
Has he given you another record deal now? Was that always the aim, to make...
Jimmy, which camera am I looking at? Jimmy, give me another record deal. Oh, he's out of the record business now.
Oh, well.
He's out of the record business.
Well, how convenient for you.
I want to make a hit record right now, man.
And just finally, would you make another documentary of this magnitude? Would you go back, knowing what you know now, knowing what it takes out of you, the intensity of the process, would you do it again?
Not for many years. I mean, it was brutal. And I'm just now, we're 8 months out of it was released in the States about 7, 8 months ago. And just this month, I'm just getting my life back, you know?
Really?
And I'm removed, like I said, 7, 8 months from it. So, yeah, I'll do another one maybe in 5, 10 years. That's brutal. It's just brutal. And to push that medium, you know, you know, I don't want to come into something and just do what's been done. And especially what was unique about this, you're talking about some of the greatest artists of all time, some of the greatest music of all time. And then I found out the hard way, ultimately some of the greatest stories of all time. And you want to meet that. And that's the challenge, you know.